Hey everyone, Detective Brooks here. This story will make you look at your life from a completely different perspective. You can't even imagine the events that took place in this wonderful family. Christina Shawn was born in September 1976 in the American city of New Orleans. Her parents dedicated their lives to military service, so the family often had to relocate, moving from one military base to another, both within the country and abroad. These constant changes of environment allowed the girl to learn about the world from a young age, meet new people and their cultures, and develop communication skills. At the same time, the need to constantly adapt to new living conditions inevitably caused stress. However, Christina seemed to overcome any difficulties with ease, only tempering her character. Eventually, the family settled in the town of Biloxi, Mississippi. It was here, at a more conscious age, that Christina discovered her love for the culinary arts. The teenage girl enjoyed cooking, and it became her way of supporting her parents, who, due to their busy work schedules, did not always have the opportunity to prepare food themselves. Christina eagerly studied cooking magazines and newspapers, mastering the secrets of the craft, and later even began to create her own unique dishes. However, cooking was not the girl's only passion. After graduating from high school, on the advice of her parents, she decided to continue her education and moved to Los Angeles, where she enrolled in the Academy of Dramatic Arts. During her studies, which ended in 2000, Christina repeatedly participated in theatrical productions and even managed to star in episodic roles in Hollywood films, in particular, as a stuntwoman in the movie Terminator: Genisys. Christina stood out not only for her beauty, but also for her athletic physique, sociability, self-confidence, and diverse talents. She easily found common ground with others and knew how to present herself in the best light. In her free time, the girl preferred active outdoor recreation. Over time, this hobby grew into something more. Christina realized what she wanted to do in life. Thanks to her dedication to a healthy lifestyle, she decided to devote herself to helping other people, motivating them to follow proper nutrition and engage in fitness. Christina herself served as a living example that such an approach is the key to a harmonious life. The girl actively promoted the rejection of bad habits. It was these interests which completely captivated Christina in adulthood that prompted her to dream of her own catering company. She planned to organize catering at themed events and parties, offering guests healthy and delicious dishes, a format typical for the early 2000s. In 2005, Christina officially registered her business and enthusiastically immersed herself in work. Through her business, she actively popularized the ideas of using environmentally friendly products and materials, positioning her own brand as completely natural and beneficial. Christy had even more ambitious plans. Another of her cherished dreams was to create a self-sufficient farm that could provide people with food with minimal interference in natural processes. The girl devoted many years to developing these ideas while continuing to pursue her other favorite activities. In 2012, Christy became a finalist in the 8th season of a popular television cooking show, but she failed to win. She usually accepted defeat with dignity, but this time she felt that she had been treated unfairly. In her opinion, the jury misunderstood and misjudged her original approach to cooking, which caused her strong indignation. However, Christy was not going to give up and was determined to prove to everyone that she was capable of pursuing her goal despite the obstacles. Later, the unpleasant impressions from this incident faded, and Christy threw herself into her usual affairs with renewed vigor. She continued to develop her catering business while participating in the filming of other culinary television programs. It was on one of these projects that fate brought her together with Joseph Coate, who was engaged in casting actors and participants for various shows. The man fell in love with the charming blonde at first sight. At first, a friendly relationship developed between them, which gradually grew into a mutual romantic attraction. Joseph fully supported Christy and believed in the great prospects of her ideas and aspirations. Later, the couple decided to start a new life together and fulfill their dream of having their own farm. They left California, sold the catering company, and moved to the cozy town of Lester in North Carolina, with a population of just under 12,000 people. At that time, the couple was already planning to start a family, so they took care to purchase a spacious plot of land. They became the owners of 36 acres, which was ideal for building the farm of their dreams and fulfilling their plans for the future, including having children. In September 2014, the couple officially formalized their relationship by exchanging wedding vows at the local community center, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Despite the move, Joseph continued to work remotely in television. From the outside, the Koch couple seemed like the perfect match, both bright, ambitious, and harmoniously complementing each other. Thanks to their talents, they had grand plans for the future. At the beginning of 2015, their lives changed dramatically. Christy became pregnant, and the couple eagerly awaited the birth of their firstborn, a girl they decided to name Skylar. It seemed that everything in their life was going as well as possible. The young family was actively preparing for the new addition, as Christy's pregnancy had already reached the 5th month. However, this story will not have a happy ending. The idyll lasted only until March 2015, when worried relatives suddenly found it impossible to contact either 38-year-old Christy or 45-year-old Joseph by phone. The calendar showed March 15, 2015, when the alarmed relatives of Joseph and Christy had been trying in vain to reach the couple by phone for several days in a row. All their attempts to contact them by phone proved futile. Since the relatives lived a considerable distance from the couple's home, they were unable to visit in person and check if everything was all right with the young family. So they turned to Cecilia, a close friend of Christy's who lived nearby, for help. The girl agreed to visit the couple's house to find out the reasons for their silence. Upon arriving at the scene, Cecilia was alarmed by the oppressive silence that reigned around. Joseph and Christy's cars were parked in the yard, but the owners themselves did not respond to knocking on the door or loud calls. Looking through the windows, her friend could not see any signs of the presence of either the husband or the wife. There was an eerie impression that they had simply vanished into thin air. The situation seemed extremely strange because their beloved dogs remained inside the house. Christy treated her pets like children and would never leave them unattended under any circumstances. Even in the case of short-term trips on business, she always made sure to arrange for someone to take care of the animals. However, this time, what was happening did not fit at all with the usual way of life of the young couple. According to their plans, Christy had no scheduled trips for that date. At 5 months pregnant, the woman led a predominantly domestic lifestyle and rarely left the confines of her own home. After carefully examining the house, Cecilia noticed signs of a break-in on the back door, which she immediately reported to the relatives of the missing couple. After that, Christy's parents did not hesitate to file a missing persons report with the police regarding their daughter and son-in-law. When the patrol officers arrived on the call, they found the doors open and made sure that no one was inside. The law enforcement officers suspected that the couple might have been victims of abduction, so the house was immediately sealed off to preserve potential evidence. In order to get at least some clue, the detectives made a request to the mobile operator regarding incoming and outgoing calls from the missing couple's phones. It turned out that in recent days, Joseph and Christy had not made any calls, which only confirmed the worst fears of their loved ones. The last recorded calls were dated March 10 and 11, and none of them aroused suspicion. The couple communicated exclusively with friends and relatives. A thorough inspection of the scene revealed traces in the house that indicated an intrusion and probable abduction of the owners. Some valuables had disappeared, but no significant clues were found that would shed light on the identity of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, the criminal did not leave behind any fingerprints or biological traces. The investigation, having barely begun, was already reaching a dead end. The news of this event shook the small community of the town. Neighbors began actively discussing among themselves possible versions of what could have happened to the successful and attractive couple. Some of them recalled how on March 13 they saw a stranger throwing an extremely bulky and heavy-looking black bag into a garbage container near the house of the missing couple, after which he quickly walked away. Unfortunately, the garbage from the bins was soon taken out, so it was no longer possible to examine the contents of the mysterious bag. The identity of the man who disposed of the garbage bag was quickly established. He turned out to be 36-year-old Robert Owens, who lived near the Koch couple's home and worked various odd jobs, including in the yard of the missing couple. In addition, he was a close friend of Christy and Joseph, often communicated with them, and was even a guest at their wedding. This information attracted the close attention of the investigators, and on March 16, Robert was called in for questioning. However, at the police station, he firmly denied any involvement in the disappearance of his friends. Meanwhile, while the suspect was being interrogated, the police managed to find the same garbage bag that the man had thrown away near the house of the missing couple. Its contents turned out to be quite telling. Charred fragments of things, some of which resembled the remains of Christy and Joseph's clothes. The find only heightened the detectives' suspicions about Robert's possible involvement in the crime. When the investigators informed Robert about the discovery of the garbage bag, he instantly became confused and began to get tangled up in his own testimony. Eventually, under the pressure of the evidence, the man confessed to the crime. According to him, on March 12, 2015, he was heading to Joseph's house, intending to perform some work. But on the way, his car ended up in a ditch near the couple's house. Robert walked the rest of the way and asked his friends to help pull out his pickup truck. Christy and Joseph readily agreed, and together they all headed to the scene of the incident. While the owners were pushing the car from the outside, their friend tried to start the engine and move from the spot. However, as Robert confessed, at some point, the unforeseeable happened. He accidentally ran over the couple. By pressing the gas pedal, the man hit Christy and Joseph, causing them to fall and lose consciousness. In a panic, Robert accidentally pressed the gas again, running over his friends' bodies a second time. The suspect insisted that it was an accident, but at that moment, he was afraid that he would not be believed and would inevitably be accused of intentional murder. In the end, Robert made the fatal decision not to call the police or an ambulance. Christy and Joseph were lying motionless and showing no signs of life, but instead of trying to help them, the man decided to get rid of the bodies and destroy all traces of the crime. He loaded the lifeless bodies of his friends into his pickup truck and took them to his own home. There, in the bathroom, Robert mutilated Joseph's body with an electric saw. He put the man's body parts in plastic bags and temporarily left Christy's body in the bedroom before doing the same to her. After that, the killer tried to destroy the remains as much as possible by burning the body fragments in the stove located in his kitchen. Robert committed all these horrific actions in order to conceal the traces of the brutal crime. After listening to the chilling details of the confession, the detectives immediately went to the suspect's house with a search warrant. There, in the stove, they found severely burnt bone fragments belonging to Christy and Joseph. Robert had not managed to completely get rid of the terrible evidence. In addition, traces of blood and biological material of the deceased couple were found on the electric saw, in the bathroom, bedroom, and on the kitchen stove. All these findings fully confirmed the truthfulness of Robert's confession regarding the dismemberment of the bodies. Without wasting time, that same night, the suspect was arrested. He was charged with the intentional murder of 2 people, as well as the unborn child, unlawful entry, and burglary. Robert did not deny his guilt in the crimes committed, but when the investigators asked him why he did not immediately report the incident to the police if it was an accident, he could not answer. His story seemed extremely unconvincing and raised reasonable doubts. The detectives did not believe the version about the accidental running over of the couple and suspected that Robert was trying to hide something. This prompted them to study the personality of the detainee more thoroughly. In the course of further investigation, law enforcement officers managed to establish Robert's probable involvement in another crime committed 15 years ago, when his close friend disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Delving into the suspect's past, the police stumbled upon another chilling secret of brutal murder with a similar modus operandi. Zepp Quinn, Robert's friend, was born in 1981. It seemed that this young man had a brilliant future ahead of him. While still in school, he enrolled in military training courses and planned to join the United States Air Force immediately after graduation. Zepp was characterized as a caring and friendly guy. At the time of his disappearance, he was working at a local Walmart supermarket. Zepp lived in the city of Asheville, North Carolina, where he met Robert Owens, the future killer of the Coat couple. One January evening in 2000, Zepp finished his work shift at 9 p.m. He was going to go on a short trip with his friend Robert so that he could buy a new car. However, Zepp did not return home that night. His mother had an uneasy feeling that something was wrong. The woman had good reason to believe that her son did not plan to leave home for long. After all, Zepp did not take with him his wallet with money, a change of clothes, or the solution for his contact lenses, which he could not do without. Everything indicated that he intended to return as soon as possible. However, neither the next morning nor even a day later, Zepp still did not return home. The alarmed mother of the young man turned to the police with a statement about her son's disappearance. But despite all the efforts of law enforcement officers, it was not possible to find any useful information about his whereabouts. The detectives carefully studied the surveillance camera recordings that could have captured the movements of the missing person on the day of his disappearance. However, Zepp was last seen on video only at 9:15 p.m. when he entered a small store with a stranger to buy a soft drink. Later, this mysterious companion was recognized as Robert Owens, the very person with whom Zepp went on that fateful trip. Surveillance cameras recorded Zepp getting into his light blue Mazda, while Robert settled behind the wheel of a Ford pickup truck. The cars left the parking lot one after the other, after which the young man's trail broke off. He seemed to have vanished into thin air. Naturally, the investigators had a number of questions for Robert, as he was the last one who communicated with a missing person and probably could shed light on his subsequent fate. During a conversation with detectives, Robert tried to recreate the events that took place after the cars disappeared from the camera's field of view. According to him, shortly after leaving the store, he and Zepp parted ways because Robert received a short message on his pager with a job offer. In order to discuss the potential order in more detail, the man was forced to leave for a while and find the nearest payphone. So he gave Zepp a conventional signal with his headlights, and both cars stopped on the side of the road. Robert explained the situation to his friend and asked him to wait a bit while he settled all the issues, after which he went about his business. As Robert claimed, he dealt with his affairs quite quickly, in about 10 minutes, and was already going to return to the place where he had left his friend. However, according to his own confession, it was not that simple. The man said that during that period, he was suffering from depression and was taking medications prescribed by a doctor, which sometimes caused him to have a depressed state and a somewhat distorted perception of reality. It seems that this is exactly what happened that fatal evening. Robert described his condition at that time as extremely agitated and confused, as if he was completely losing control of himself. According to the suspect's version, when he was approaching the agreed meeting place, he lost control of the vehicle and his pickup truck flew into a ditch. Despite all his attempts, Robert could not pull the car out on his own. However, realizing that he was near the place where Zepp was waiting for him, the man decided to walk the rest of the way. Trying once again to cope with the blocked vehicle, Robert suddenly noticed that a car very similar to his 18-year-old friend's car drove past him, but the driver did not stop or even slow down. Robert had no way to catch up with or pursue the car without his own vehicle. Thus, according to the suspect, he had no idea where Zepp could have gone and what had happened to him. The subsequent chronology of events in Robert's account seemed extremely vague and confused. It is only known that on the same night, he ended up in the hospital, allegedly due to an accident, which, however, was in no way connected with Zepp's disappearance at least. This is the version voiced by the man. However, no confirmation of his words could be found according to police reports. No accidents were recorded in the county that night. Robert claimed that as a result of the accident, he received quite serious injuries, broken ribs and a concussion. According to him, he sustained these injuries a few hours after Zepp's disappearance. The suspect's story revealed many gaps and inconsistencies, which gave the impression that he was simply making up details on the fly to confuse the police. Soon, Robert was recognized as the main suspect in this case, as he had no convincing alibi and was the last person who had contact with the missing young man. However, the investigators did not immediately manage to break Robert during interrogations to bring charges. They needed more substantial evidence than just suspicions. Therefore, the primary task was to find either the missing boy or at least his car. It is worth noting that in the early 2000s, the investigation of such crimes was much more difficult than it is today. Law enforcement officers did not have the technical capabilities to quickly establish the whereabouts of a suspect or victim or track their telephone conversations. Instant messaging services were also just beginning to gain popularity and were not under the supervision of special services. There were also very few street surveillance cameras. In fact, all hope was placed on random witnesses who could provide any information about the events of that evening. But unfortunately, none could be found. Later, new persons of interest were added to the list of suspects, among them Massey Taylor and her ex-boyfriend. As it turned out, Massey had started dating Zepp shortly before his mysterious disappearance. 2 weeks before these events, the young people accidentally met in one of the local restaurants and had been communicating ever since. At that time, the girl had just broken up with her previous boyfriend, Wesley Smith. Rumor had it that their relationship was not without manifestations of physical and psychological violence on the part of the ex-partner. According to witnesses, Zepp, having learned about Massey's problems with her former partner, expressed a desire to intervene and help the girl. One day, he even showed up at her work just at the moment when Wesley was there. The young man intended to personally talk to the offender of his new friend, as she was clearly not indifferent to him. A heated argument broke out between Zepp and Wesley, which nearly turned into a fight. Several eyewitnesses heard Massey's enraged ex-boyfriend openly threaten to settle scores with his rival. It was quite obvious that he had a motive to get rid of Zepp. However, during interrogations at the police station, both Massey and Wesley firmly denied any involvement in Zepp's disappearance. The alibis of both were thoroughly checked, and eventually, the investigation concluded that they were not involved in this case. Therefore, the investigation and search for the missing boy continued. 4 days after his disappearance, Zepp's abandoned light blue Mazda was found. One of the employees who worked with the boy's mother called her and reported that he had seen the familiar car in a parking lot near the hospital. The car had obviously been abandoned under strange circumstances. The headlights were still on, and the doors were unlocked. After carefully examining the interior of the car, police experts were able to find several personal belongings of the missing owner, including a plastic card for using payphones. Also found in the car were several empty drink bottles and an unknown man's jacket, which definitely did not belong to Zepp. It was not possible to establish who owned this item of clothing, which was lying on the back seat. Interestingly, an inscription made with women's lipstick was found on the windshield of the car. The detectives made every effort to analyze the collected evidence, but this did not yield the desired results. It was impossible to track where and when Zepp's phone card was last used. Experts could not find traces of DNA or fingerprints on any of the items found in the car that would belong to anyone other than the vehicle's owner. The police managed to find several witnesses who claimed to have seen a young girl behind the wheel of the Mazda. Judging by their descriptions, she looked very much like Massey Taylor, Zepp's girlfriend. However, it was not possible to prove her involvement in the events of that night, as Massey had a reliable alibi. Despite all the difficulties, one rather interesting fact did come to light during the investigation. Shortly before his disappearance, Zepp sent a mysterious message to his aunt's pager. Unfortunately, the woman was unable to view it right away, as she had just gone to dinner at the home of Massey's mother, with whom she was friends. This unfortunate coincidence prevented her from finding out what her nephew was trying to convey in the last hours before his disappearance. Returning late in the evening from her friend's house, Zepp's aunt discovered that her home had been robbed. The intruders had taken away many valuable items, including the same pager with the unknown message from her nephew. Therefore, the woman could no longer find out what the text contained. It is noteworthy that the police experts who worked at the crime scene could not find any fingerprints or even any clue that would indicate the identity of the burglar. It is quite possible that the thief acted in gloves, leaving no traces. Thus, the investigation reached a dead end, and no substantial information about Zepp's fate could be obtained. The case remained unsolved, and the young man was considered missing for a long 15 years. However, the investigators were convinced that it was Robert who was involved in his disappearance and most likely killed his friend. The situation changed radically only in 2015, when Robert was arrested on charges of murdering the married couple. During a thorough search of his home, police stumbled upon a strange find. Under a thick layer of concrete, they discovered a cavity containing solid fragments of organic origin, as well as particles of fabric and skin. Such a method of getting rid of physical evidence seemed extremely suspicious. The detectives instantly realized that these findings could shed light on the mystery of Zepp's disappearance, as it was quite likely that the discovered remains could belong to him. All the physical evidence was removed from the suspect's home and sent for examination. In addition to the mysterious bones, several other items were found that attracted the attention of investigators, in particular, a plastic bag with a white powder of unknown origin. Later, an examination showed that the substance was quicklime. Important testimony was also obtained from one of the detainees' relatives. He recalled that in the winter of 2000 or a little later, Robert was burning some garbage on his property, which emitted an extremely pungent and unpleasant odor that even then seemed extremely strange to the witness. Soon after, a concrete platform appeared in the same place, which did not fit into the overall landscape of the yard at all. When asked by neighbors, the owner replied that he planned to arrange a pond for fish farming. But this idea was never realized, and later it was completely forgotten. However, it is worth noting that it was under this platform that the police discovered the aforementioned cavity with the mysterious bones. The results of the forensic examination confirmed the worst fears of the investigation. The remains did indeed belong to Zepp Quinn, who had disappeared 15 years earlier. The case of the young man's murder was moved from a dead point, and on April 27, 2017, Robert Owens appeared in court on charges of committing this and other serious crimes. The defense of the defendant immediately began active attempts to justify the actions of their client and mitigate his guilt. The lawyers argued that Robert had mental disorders and problems with an adequate perception of reality caused by taking strong painkillers that a doctor had once prescribed for him. Moreover, in order to combat the side effects of these drugs, the man was prescribed even more medications, which ultimately only exacerbated his mental disorders. All this, according to the defenders, led to irrational behavior and the inability to fully control his own actions. In addition, the defense emphasized that the defendant suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Due to such a line of Robert's lawyers, he could well have been found insane and sent for compulsory psychiatric treatment instead of a real term behind bars. So when the court session had been going on for more than 2 hours, the prosecutors decided to compromise and offer the accused a plea bargain. According to this agreement, the charges of first-degree intentional murder were removed from Robert, and instead, he was only charged with 2 episodes of second-degree murder and robbery. Thus, the defendant actually avoided responsibility even for the death of Christie's unborn child. Robert decided to accept these terms and fully admitted his guilt in the crimes charged against him. In the end, the court passed a sentence 74 years in prison with the right to parole no earlier than 60 years. When the defendant was given the last word, he addressed the families of his victims with assurances that he deeply regretted what he had done. Robert claimed that he was not really a bad person, and the deceased were his friends, whom he did not wish any harm at all. He said that it was all a tragic accident, nothing more. However, none of the defendant's excuses found a response from those present at the hearing. His version of events seemed completely absurd and implausible. Even if we take at face value the story about the accident and the unintentional double running over of the couple, Robert's subsequent actions raised many questions. After all, there was a possibility that the accident victims survived and needed immediate medical attention. However, instead of checking their condition and calling an ambulance, the man simply took the battered bodies home and cold-bloodedly mutilated them there. For his part, the medical examiner who worked on the case expressed doubts that the nature of the injuries of the deceased corresponded to the version of events voiced by Robert. True, given the poor preservation of the remains, the specialist could not reconstruct the circumstances of the couple's death with 100% certainty. The defendant himself could not in any way explain what motive prompted him to commit such cruel and inhuman acts. His belated apologies did not make any impression on the relatives of the murdered and did not make them soften their position. The families of Christie and Joseph did not hide their indignation and righteous anger. They wanted the killer to suffer behind prison walls until the end of his days, and after death, he would forever end up in the flames of hell. Their desire was not surprising, because even seasoned law enforcement officials called this crime one of the most chilling and disturbing in the entire history of their service in this small town. Despite the fact that the perpetrator of the tragedy was finally behind bars, the case did not end there. Detectives continued to work on the mysterious disappearance of Zepp Quinn, aiming to bring a new charge against Robert in this case, which had been in the archives of unsolved crimes for 15 years. In 2018, the defendant finally made an unexpected statement. Robert assured that he was not involved in the murder of his 18-year-old friend. At the same time, he revealed new details to the investigation that allegedly shed light on the true circumstances of that chilling event. According to Robert, Zepp's disappearance and death were orchestrated by his own uncle, Walter Gene Owens. The man allegedly personally developed a plan to rob and kill the trusting young man. To lure Zepp to the place of the massacre, the uncle, together with Robert, enticed the love-struck boy to the Uwharrie National Forest under the pretext of meeting his girlfriend Massey. It was probably a message about this date that Zepp sent to his aunt's pager shortly before his disappearance. However, at the appointed place, the deceived Romeo was not met by the embraces of his beloved, but by 2 armed men with criminal intentions. As Robert claimed, it was his uncle Walter who shot Zepp with a .22 caliber hunting rifle without hesitation, in order to deprive the boy of the opportunity to resist or seek help from the police. After that, the uncle allegedly mutilated the body into parts and then burned the remains. In this horrific story, an eerie analogy was clearly traced. Both relatives, it seems, got rid of the bodies of their victims in the same way. This detail only heightened suspicions about Robert's leading role in these atrocities. However, the defendant continued to insist on his own non-involvement in the murder of his friend. He said that only under pressure from his uncle did he become an unwitting accomplice in concealing the traces of the crime. Moreover, Robert assured that if the cops carefully examined the crime scene in the national park, they would surely find physical evidence that would confirm his testimony. The police officers immediately went to the specified area, but despite all their efforts, they could not find a single clue. Apparently, over the 15 years that had passed, natural processes and wild fauna had destroyed almost all possible traces of the bloody drama. Law enforcement officers failed to find even the used cartridges from the weapon mentioned by Robert at the scene. Of course, the most logical step in this situation would be to turn to Walter Owens for explanations, but unfortunately, this opportunity was lost forever. The uncle died of a heart attack back in 2017, so no one could confirm or refute Robert's testimony anymore. It seems that the investigation into the circumstances of Zepp's death reached the same dead end as the case of the murder of the Coate couple. Taylor Palmer, a 12-year-old girl, had her whole life ahead of her, but unfortunately, she met a terrible fate. Being an ordinary teenager, she became a victim of inhuman violence. Taylor's mother, sensing a serious threat to her daughter's life from her tyrant husband, placed her under the care of the Child Protection Center. The woman hoped this decision would keep the girl out of danger and give her a chance for a better future. However, as it later turned out, the mother's good intentions only worsened the situation for young Tia, as Taylor was affectionately called by her loved ones, and soon a horrific tragedy occurred. Under pressure from her tyrant husband, Cindy, Taylor's birth mother, was forced to hand her daughter over to the Child Protection System. She sincerely believed she was doing the right thing, as circumstances required saving the child. The woman, herself a victim of domestic violence, sought to protect her daughter from a similar fate. Due to the lack of opportunity to properly raise the girl and strained family relationships, Taylor grew up to be a troubled child. She often ran away from home to avoid conflicts between her parents and had a propensity for vagrancy. In January 2015, by decision of the Child Protection Center, 12-year-old Taylor was sent to a wonderful family living in the town of Chambers Flat, about a 40-minute drive from Brisbane, Australia. It was a quiet and cozy town with a population of around 500 people. The Thornburns became the foster family for the girl, a household consisting of the head of the family, Rick, his wife Julie, and their two sons. The elder John, 19 years old, and the younger Trent, 18 years old. By that time, Taylor had already managed to change several foster families. For one reason or another, new families did not suit her due to the girl's difficult character. Some considered Taylor quite a conflicted personality. The Thornburn family was no exception. Young Taylor was dissatisfied with the prospect of living with two teenage boys much older than her. However, she had no choice. Taylor's new foster parents, Rick and Julie, had been married for over 25 years at the time. Rick, a former truck driver, had to switch to lighter vehicles due to a serious back injury. This led him to start his own business selling fast food from a van, and he also owned a horse farm. Julie, his wife, opened a home daycare. Throughout the district, the Thornburn family had a reputation as a decent, respected, and exemplary family, so the Child Protection Services chose them as a foster family for Taylor. For 4 months, it seemed that the girl had settled well into her new family and continued to live there until the tragic events that followed. Taylor attended Morrison State High School, located just a 20-minute drive from the Thornburn home. Outwardly, life seemed to be getting better. Everyone got used to Taylor, and she seemed to get along with her new household members. But as it turned out, not everything was as cloudless as it might have seemed at first glance. The morning of October 30, 2015, seemed ordinary for the Thornburn family. Rick, as usual, drove his foster daughter Taylor to school and returned home to repair his car. But just a few hours later, a disturbing call came from the school. Taylor had not shown up for classes. For the girl, this was not the first time she had run away. With a difficult childhood behind her, she was used to escaping her problems in this way. However, this time, unlike previous instances when Taylor would quickly return on her own or be found, the girl vanished without a trace. In desperation, Rick posted on social media, describing the situation and begging anyone who might know Taylor's whereabouts to come forward. Unfortunately, his plea went unanswered. The girl's foster family knew that Taylor was eagerly awaiting Halloween and had even prepared a costume, so her disappearance on the eve of the holiday seemed more than strange. Eventually, they decided to contact the police, and soon the teenager was declared missing. However, no serious search was conducted, as everyone assumed the girl would soon return after another runaway attempt. A little less than a week had passed since the foster child disappeared. Suddenly, early in the morning on November 5, 2015, a chilling call came to the police. A local fisherman who contacted the emergency services reported a horrifying discovery. He had stumbled upon a body in the yellowed reeds in the shallow waters of the Pimpama River. The location where the remains were found was approximately 30 kilometers south of where Taylor was last seen alive a week earlier. During this time, the body had undergone significant decomposition, likely aided by both the local fauna and the region's specific climatic conditions. The police officers who arrived at the scene of the terrible find could not even confidently determine the sex of the deceased person. let alone establish their identity. Only after a thorough examination did they suggest that it was the body of a teenager. The condition of the remains was horrific. The body, except for underwear, had no clothing on it. The remains were immediately sent for an autopsy and forensic examination. Comparing details about missing persons in the area, the police assumed that the deceased could be 12-year-old Taylor Palmer, who had disappeared about a week earlier. Later, this assumption was confirmed by the results of a DNA analysis conducted in the laboratory, and the worst fears of law enforcement came true. During a thorough examination of the body, experts concluded that the terrible injuries, initially mistaken for animal bite marks, were most likely inflicted by a person. It became clear that the girl had become a victim of brutal violence. The case was immediately reclassified as a murder, and an investigation began. Considering the fact that Rick Thornburn was the last person who likely saw Taylor alive, investigators began the inquiry by talking to him. From the very beginning, Rick aroused suspicion with his strange behavior and inconsistencies in his statements. However, all of this had yet to be thoroughly checked and proven. It was also decided to question other members of the girl's foster family, as perhaps one of them had more information. Unfortunately, interrogations of family members yielded no useful information. Everyone, as one, confirmed the words of the head of the family that he had taken Taylor to school at 7:50 a.m., and no one had seen the missing girl since. After that, the investigators went to the school to confirm the family's testimony, and it was there that they managed to obtain more valuable information. The detectives spoke with all the 7th grade students in Taylor's class, her friends and teachers. Over 100 people were interviewed in total. It turned out that absolutely no one had seen her that day when she was going to class, or even near the school. After examining the surveillance camera footage from outside and inside the school on the day of the girl's disappearance, the detectives became convinced that Taylor had not come to school and had not been spotted near the entrance, which was strange. Where then could the girl have gone? However, there were female students, Taylor's friends, who claimed that their classmate had serious problems at home. One of them said that Taylor had begged her to take her home because her foster parents were treating her badly, and she was in for big trouble with them. But the friend, due to her young age, could not make such decisions for her family and bring Taylor home, and she didn't think it was that bad. But soon after, Taylor died a terrible death. This happened literally a week before the girl's disappearance. The friend believed that these events could be related. However, Taylor did not specify to her exactly what the foster family was doing to her. After talking to other students, the police concluded that Taylor had no enemies and no one else would have harmed her. Suspicions about the foster family intensified, and investigators continued to check the Thornburns. But the foster family members categorically denied all accusations of domestic violence against them and claimed that Taylor was making everything up. As in the case of previous families from which she had run away and also complained about them, the police verified this information and found that Taylor was indeed prone to running away and was a difficult teenager. All the people close to the family, as well as neighbors, claimed that this was an exemplary family. Many took their children to their home for a private daycare, and no one believed that such decent people could have done anything to Taylor. Everyone thought she had simply run away, invented a story about being mistreated as before, and got into some trouble and became a victim of an attack. Therefore, the police, having no grounds for suspecting the family, left them alone. This family also seemed exemplary to them, and they began to look for the reason for the murder elsewhere. Meanwhile, the foster family continued to operate the home daycare. During the investigation, detectives also interrogated about 300 registered sex offenders in the area who could have been involved in sexually motivated attacks. But this did not allow them to obtain a single lead or even the slightest hint of what might have happened to the teenager. Most of them had alibis, and some no longer even lived in the area, so no suspects were identified from this list. On December 4, 2015, shoes likely belonging to Taylor were found 100 meters from where the body was discovered, as well as her backpack that the girl used to go to school. This story became so high profile that it attracted widespread public attention. It was broadcast on many TV channels in Australia, so gradually the whole country learned about this case. On the eve of Taylor's funeral, a series of pickets took place. Outraged citizens demanded the quickest possible solution to the horrific crime and the punishment of those responsible for the girl's gruesome death, which she clearly did not deserve. The victim's birth mother, being one of the organizers of the protests, persistently sought answers from the police regarding the circumstances of her daughter's death. She appeared on television, drawing the attention of the general public to this tragedy. The woman expressed indignation at the inaction of the Child Protection Services, to whom she had entrusted her child. It was largely thanks to her efforts that over 600 people came to the farewell ceremony for Taylor, which took place on November 14. Most of them had never met the girl during her lifetime, but felt the need to pay their respects. Many of those present were dressed in white and purple t-shirts with hearts and Taylor's name, as purple was her favorite color. About 400 white roses were placed on the coffin, and when the hearse drove off to the private cremation site, purple balloons were released into the sky. 5 months later, since the day of Taylor Palmer's murder, the investigation still had no significant breakthrough. In a desperate attempt to obtain any information that would help the investigation, a reward was announced. The sum of 250,000 Australian dollars, about $160,000, was intended to be an incentive for potential witnesses. The girl's mother appeared on television again, pleading for help. She urged eyewitnesses to come forward, and even the criminals themselves to confess. In addition to the financial reward, the police guaranteed immunity from prosecution for any accomplices who, while not being the direct perpetrator of the crime, would be the first to provide valuable information. However, even such unprecedented measures did not help shed light on the circumstances of Taylor's death. Although several calls were received from concerned citizens on the hotline, none of them contained useful information. The summer of 2016 passed, and the investigation still had not identified the main suspect. Investigators worked through one version after another, questioning individuals previously convicted of sexual crimes. However, due to the significant decomposition of the body at the time of its discovery, forensic experts were unable to find clues that would allow them to accurately determine the cause of the girl's death. The only more or less reasonable assumption was the guess about strangulation, as indicated by the fracture of the hyoid bone. The most likely scenario was considered to be Taylor's abduction by a random driver near the school, as the area where parents usually drop off their children was not in the view of surveillance cameras. Anything could have happened there. However, this was just one of many theories considered by law enforcement. The reward of $250,000 Australian dollars, promised to anyone who would provide information leading to the arrest of the killer, still remained unclaimed. And then, in May 2016, after exhausting months of fruitless work, an anonymous call containing valuable information was received by the state police line. The mysterious informant reported that he had information regarding Taylor and the Thornburn foster family, where the girl had ended up. According to him, the Thornburn couple had been looking for a troubled child from the very beginning in order to receive increased payments for her care. They had no other feelings for Taylor except mercenary interest. Moreover, the anonymous informant expressed a firm conviction that each member of the foster family could be involved, to some extent, in Taylor's tragic fate. Unfortunately, he ended the conversation at this point and did not get in touch again. Attempts to establish the identity of the mysterious Good Samaritan in order to obtain additional information from him were unsuccessful. However, this call prompted investigators to return to the version of the possible guilt of the foster family in the girl's death. After all, at the very beginning of the investigation, they had received signals from students about domestic violence in the Thornburn household. However, at that time, these testimonies could not be confirmed, so this line of investigation was temporarily abandoned. Now, however, the detectives decided to take a closer look at the victim's surroundings again. Trying to verify the words of the anonymous informant, law enforcement officers re-interviewed some of Taylor's classmates. One of the girl's close friends told about her confession of an intimate relationship with the younger of the Thornburn couple's sons, 19-year-old Trent, who was considered a real handsome man. Due to her age, Taylor did not fully understand the nature of this relationship, naively considering it a manifestation of romantic feelings, as Trent assured her. The girl had even managed to fall in love with him and was delighted with the horses that the family kept on the farm. At the same time, young Taylor was terribly afraid not only of Trent, but of his entire family, which is why she sought to escape from them by any means. It was suggested that in the Thornburn home, in addition to sexual abuse, there could also be brutal physical abuse of the foster child. These testimonies from the classmate undoubtedly required thorough verification. However, numerous repeated interrogations of family members yielded no results. Everyone, as one, continued to categorically deny the slightest suspicion of wrongdoing, especially sexual harassment of a minor. Nevertheless, given the seriousness of the accusations, the local authorities decided to temporarily suspend the Thornburns' license to operate a daycare center and also revoked the family's permission to care for foster children. Law enforcement officers installed listening devices in the suspect's house. Almost every day, they managed to record shocking details that completely destroyed the image of a respectable family that the Thornburns had so carefully cultivated. In particular, it became known that on October 29, 2015, just the day before the girl's disappearance, an emergency family meeting took place. During this meeting, Trent informed his parents about the suspicious abdominal pain that Taylor was complaining about. This caused the couple great concern and even suspicion about the possible pregnancy of their 12-year-old foster daughter. As it turned out, shortly before Taylor's disappearance, the Thornburns learned about the intimate relationship between the girl and their younger son, which took place when no one was home. According to Trent himself, recorded during the wiretapping, he repeatedly had sexual intercourse with his underage foster sister. This relationship lasted about 10 months, practically the entire period during which the girl was under the family's care. Eventually, when they suspected that Taylor might be pregnant, the 19-year-old young man turned to his parents. He was terribly afraid of possible publicity, as the 7-year age difference de facto made him a criminal. However, the head of the family, Rick, reassured his son, assuring him that he would take care of solving the problem himself. Judging by the overheard conversations, the girl was terrified of her foster father. More than anything in the world, she feared the prospect of being left alone with him. Apparently, these fears were not unfounded. The rest of the family members were also openly horrified by Rick, because under the mask of a respectable family man hid an extremely cruel and dangerous personality, which was later confirmed. The evening after the aforementioned meeting brought new horrific events. Rick, having driven all the household members out of the house except for his foster daughter, was left alone with her. When, as agreed, the rest of the family members returned a couple of hours later, the girl was nowhere to be found. When asked about her disappearance, the head of the family flatly stated that Taylor had run away and the problem with her was solved once and for all. "She definitely won't tell anyone anything now," he grimly summarized. A chilling guess flashed through the minds of the relatives had the father killed the girl, if he was so sure of her silence. When one of the brothers dared to check her room, Rick strictly forbade him to do so, threateningly stopping his son. None of the Thornburns even thought of contradicting the all-powerful head of the family, so everyone simply kept silent about the incident. Thus, the falsity of Rick's story about how he allegedly took his foster daughter to school, after which she disappeared, became obvious. The fact is that in reality, he physically could not have done this. At that point, Taylor was no longer in the house, and most likely, she was already dead. However, what exactly Rick had done to her remained a mystery even to the man's closest relatives. Thanks to the wiretapping of private conversations in the house, detectives repeatedly witnessed Rick instructing everyone on what to say and how to behave so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion from the police, and everyone obediently listened to his instructions. Law enforcement officers decided to begin interrogations with the couple's sons and their mother, rightly believing that they would be the easiest to break. And indeed, when investigators began to operate with the facts known to them, the interrogated gradually began to provide the necessary information. The longer the communication lasted, the clearer the terrifying picture of what was really happening behind the closed doors of the Thornburn home became. Everything indicated that Rick had arranged everything as if he was trying to protect his family. After carefully studying the footage from the outdoor surveillance cameras near the school, the police realized that the head of the family had gone to great lengths to disguise his crime and create a false alibi for the investigation. For example, on that fateful morning, he did drive in the direction of the school, and his car was captured by several cameras. But none of them recorded the girl getting out of the car. After these stunning revelations, the Thornburn family was hit by a barrage of accusations and public condemnation. Julie and George were accused of giving false testimony and deliberately misleading the investigation. Trent was accused of sexual violence against a minor, and Rick was charged with premeditated first-degree murder and attempts to confuse the investigation. He had intentionally mutilated the victim's body so horribly to make it impossible for forensic experts and the police to confirm her identity. And this worked to some extent because at first, even the gender of the deceased could not be established. Fortunately, despite all efforts, it was impossible to completely exclude the possibility of identifying the body. Obviously, Rick was unaware of the existence of DNA analysis. In addition, law enforcement had strong reasons to suspect Rick of years of brutal physical and sexual abuse of all the children in the family, including his own. In total, at least 9 serious charges were brought against this monster in human form, and some of them did not even directly relate to the deceased girl. Trent was accused of debauchery and giving false testimony to the investigation. The family car, which, as it turned out, was hastily sold shortly after Taylor's disappearance, was taken from the new owner for a thorough inspection. Blood traces were found on it. These stunning events could not but affect Rick's health. On the day of his arrest, while in custody in a pre-trial detention center, he lost consciousness. The man's condition was so severe that doctors had to put him into an artificial coma. However, after a few days in the hospital, Rick regained consciousness. Medics suggested that he had deliberately provoked the exacerbation by taking some medications. Fortunately, this monster in human form failed to escape responsibility for the crimes committed. Eventually, all members of the Thornburn family appeared in court one by one. The cynicism and cruelty of their actions so shook the public that people literally craved reprisals against the entire family, capable of such inhuman brutality towards a defenseless girl. The evidence provided by the prosecution was so eloquent that the arguments of the defense were practically not taken seriously by the court. Julie and Joshua pleaded guilty on all counts and agreed to testify against Trent and Rick. The jury did not have to deliberate for long. They unanimously found all family members to be real monsters, guilty of various crimes. As a result, Joshua was sentenced to 3 months in prison. His mother received 1.5 years for false testimony. Trent, who also confessed to everything, was sent to prison for 4 years for incest, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Currently, the mother and sons are already at large. Trent, who repeatedly raped Taylor, was released from prison on January 19, 2018, having spent only 16 months there. The main sadist of this story, Rick, received the most severe punishment. During the trial, he confessed to the murder of Taylor, which he brutally committed in the barn, and the subsequent concealment of the girl's body in the river to save the reputation of his son and the entire family. In addition, the man was found guilty of a number of other serious crimes. In May 2018, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment with the right to parole no earlier than 20 years. The shocking details of this case caused not only a wave of public outrage and close media attention. The Australian legal system undertook a thorough revision of the legislation governing the principles of protecting children transferred to the care of foster families. As a result, a number of improvements were introduced aimed at strengthening control, especially in terms of identifying potential criminal elements among candidates for guardianship or persons who already had problems with the law. In addition, several new norms appeared concerning the care of minors with deviant behavior, as well as requirements for married couples applying for the adoption of such children. What drives people to cross the line of the law? Human nature is so ambiguous and multifaceted that every action has its own underlying reason. You'll be surprised, but the vast majority of crimes happen at home during quarrels and feuds when everything seems to be calm. However, these violent outbursts are not the cause. You'll be shocked when you hear how tragically this man's life ended. On the morning of January 12, 2019, a report came in about the death of 65-year-old Michael Redlich. A well-known figure in certain circles, a former NBA executive with the Memphis Grizzlies and a respected professor at the University of Central Florida, he was initially thought to have died from a heart attack. However, when the ambulance arrived at the scene, it became clear that the cause of Mr. Redlich's death was a stab wound to the chest. Various theories were considered, including self-harm. Later, forensic experts concluded that the incident was a criminal act of taking a life. After some time, the perpetrator was identified. The person who helped Michael meet his fate turned out to be his beloved wife. In June 2022, she stood trial. But this story is not as simple as it seems. The woman did not admit her guilt in the intentional crime and often changed her testimony. The court battles between the prosecution and the defense were long and fierce, and the court's verdict came as a surprise to everyone present. So what really happened in the Florida suburb of Winter Park? Who is the real victim, and could the tragedy have been avoided? Let's figure it out together. In the dock is 46-year-old Danielle Redlich, a short, slender woman. Her chestnut hair has noticeably grayed, either due to the lack of opportunity to visit a hairdresser while being in custody for about 3 years, or because the gray hair is evidence of genuine emotional suffering and stress. Until 2019, she was an ordinary working American, a mother of 2 wonderful children. By profession, she was a multimedia communications specialist and not a widely known person. But after the crime against her own husband, her name made headlines in the media. This always happens when the dirty laundry of a seemingly respectable couple is put on public display. Danielle was born in 1976 in Florida. Soon after, her family moved to Cleveland, Ohio. The girl's childhood was typical in many ways. She grew up kind and well-mannered, with a creative streak. Danielle was the eldest child in the family. Over the years, her attraction to the beautiful only intensified. She first entered Valencia College, where she earned an associate's degree in the arts. Later, she continued her studies in the psychology department of Baldwin Wallace University. In 1996, Danielle's mother, Caitlin Aquino, remarried. However, this marriage lasted only 2 years, after which Caitlin succumbed to cancer. It turned out that the woman had been battling breast cancer for a long time. Thanks to her husband's comprehensive insurance coverage, she received top-notch medical care, which was the main reason for legally formalizing their union. Unfortunately, even high-quality treatment ultimately did not yield the desired results. After becoming a widower, Caitlin's husband not only lost his wife, but also became the sole guardian of her children. Since it was difficult for him to raise them alone, he turned to the deceased's eldest daughter, Danielle, for help. At that time, the 22-year-old girl was already living independently but responded to the call. So, after her mother's passing, Danielle, her brother, sister, and their stepfather, Michael Redlich, found themselves under the same roof. Yes, you heard it right. We're talking about the same Michael who later became Danielle's lawful husband and was brutally abused on a cold winter evening in 2019. For now, the couple's relationship was based on friendship. Danielle took care of the younger children and worked part-time at a bar. Michael was building his career in professional sports, engaged in player recruitment. He genuinely became attached to the children, who became closer to him than his own. He also felt comfortable with Danielle. Over time, she saw in him someone she could rely on. Despite the 20-year age difference, their communication was easy and natural. Gradually, the man and woman began to grow closer. Neither age nor status was an obstacle for them. Although initially, Danielle preferred not to publicize their relationship to her family, so for a while, they dated in secret. Next to his new chosen one, Michael felt younger in soul and body, and she felt loved and protected. Thanks to her husband's good connections, Danielle quickly found a new job at an advertising agency. In addition, he earned a decent income and devoted all his free time to the family. Overall, everything was going great for the couple. Some time passed, and Mr. Redlich received an extremely attractive job offer. He was offered the position of Vice President of Corporate Sales for the Memphis Grizzlies basketball club. But the new job required moving to another state. Without hesitating for a second, Michael suggested that Danielle go with him. However, she had doubts. The girl didn't want to abruptly change her familiar way of life, and she was still studying. Therefore, she declined the offer. But the long-distance relationship continued, and the couple often met. Once, Michael showed Danielle the house he had purchased for them. This greatly impressed her. The cottage was located in a picturesque area near the Mississippi River, a quiet and cozy neighborhood. Eventually, Danielle did decide to move and start a life together. To dispel his beloved's last doubts, Redlich found her an interesting vacancy in the radio industry. Recalling those times, Danielle said that initially, everything was perfect, and only Michael's work later became a catalyst for change. Many years later, at the trial against her mother, the couple's 15-year-old daughter, Jaden, testified. She described what a wonderful father Michael was and how much he had done for the family. Together with her 8-year-old brother Sawyer, they attended one of the best schools. The children cherished dreams of a sports career, as their father encouraged and supported their endeavors in every way, enrolling them in specialized sections. Jaden felt a strong connection with her dad, which she couldn't say about her mom. In her eyes, Danielle was hysterical, manipulative, and sometimes a toxic person. The young lady sincerely believed that it was her mother who provoked all the domestic quarrels, while her father did everything possible to keep the family together and maintain harmony. But was everything really as the elder daughter saw it? And what actually caused the rift in this seemingly happy and close-knit family? Mr. Redlich's new responsibilities were accompanied by increased stress and responsibility, and relations with his bosses were tense. All of this had a negative impact on Michael. He became nervous and exhausted. To relax and unwind somehow, the man began to seek solace in alcohol. Later, this turned into a daily habit. Michael often stayed out late, coming home drunk and in a bad mood. A gloomy atmosphere prevailed in the house. Danielle tried to be a support for her husband, understanding his difficult state. It seemed that after talking to her, he would calm down a bit and promise to quit drinking. But these promises turned out to be short-lived. Once, Michael ignored a joint dinner they had planned, and this was far from the first time. But that time, the couple had specifically agreed to spend time together. Danielle was extremely upset and said that if he couldn't give her attention, he could have at least warned her so she could plan something else. Heading for the door, the woman made an ill-timed joke, which struck a nerve with Michael. He blocked her path and hit her in the face. The slap was so strong that Danielle staggered, and then she saw that her clothes and the floor were sprayed with blood. Shocked, she recoiled from her husband, who burst into tears and began to apologize. Obviously, Michael sincerely repented and immediately tried to make amends. He took his wife to a familiar sports doctor and told him what had happened. The medic examined the unfortunate victim, provided first aid, and then advised her to see a dentist and a plastic surgeon, as the injuries were quite serious. Danielle even lost a front tooth. The next day, Michael organized an unforgettable dinner and was very attentive and caring. Undoubtedly, his wife forgave him and didn't report the incident anywhere. The state had strict laws regarding domestic violence, but Mrs. Redlick took pity on her husband and decided not to create extra problems for him. In fact, this was not the first alarming sign. Danielle had already encountered similar behavior before. The incident occurred when they were living together in Cleveland. At a concert, Danielle was talking to an ex-boyfriend, which aroused jealousy in Michael. On the way home, he made sarcastic remarks about it. Danielle responded in kind. Suddenly, Michael hit her and then immediately apologized, explaining his action by saying that she had hurt his feelings. Danielle forgave her partner, taking some of the blame herself. Over time, the incident was forgotten. After all sorts of things happen in relationships. The year 2003 was special for the Redlick couple. Their first child, a daughter named Jaden, was born. And just a year later, the couple officially legalized their relationship. It was a bright and carefree period in their lives. Everything seemed to be going great. But despite this, Michael still had to deal with problems at work. There were personnel changes in the company, and he didn't get the promotion he had hoped for. 7 years passed, and the family was joined by another baby, a boy named Sawyer. The parents were fully immersed in raising their children. There was just one unfortunate circumstance: Michael's work. The level of tension was rising, and the man again began to drown his stress in alcohol. Quarrels in the family flared up more and more often. During one of them, Michael grabbed Danielle by the throat and pinned her against the wall. The woman was horrified by this turn of events. This time, she couldn't endure the brutal treatment. Packing her things and taking the children, Danielle moved in with relatives. By the way, initially, they didn't approve of this marriage, but later came to terms with their daughter's choice. Michael visited her more than once, begging for forgiveness and pleading with her to come back home. After a while, they managed to mend their relationship, but the following years were like a roller coaster. The Redlick family changed their place of residence several times. The head of the family was offered a job in California, where they lived for about 5 years. This period could hardly be called cloudless. The man continued to struggle with his demons and couldn't get rid of the destructive drinking habit. And at one point, both he and Danielle found themselves unemployed and living off their savings. 2014 brought new changes, this time a move to Indiana. Fortunately, the prospects were encouraging. To find a place to live and settle all matters, Michael went there ahead. Danielle stayed in California with the children. They needed time to sell the old house and belongings. The constant moving took a lot of strength and energy. It was not easy for the children to adapt to the new conditions. The whole process dragged on for a whole year. During this time, the family's financial situation improved, but the marital relationship underwent certain changes. The distance and rare meetings did their job. Danielle and Michael grew apart, barely communicating. When the moment of reunion finally came, new challenges arose before them. At some point, Danielle suspected her husband of cheating. Michael became unusually cold and distant, and the former passion faded away. However, he found the strength to admit that the problem lay in his age and health. Previously, Michael was embarrassed to talk about it, fearing that he would lose his young wife. But Danielle appreciated his honesty and continued to support him as before. After trying a number of medications, the couple decided to try a course of hormonal injections. Testosterone injections helped rejuvenate Michael both physically and psychologically. It seemed that he had shed a dozen years, regaining his former energy and zeal. But along with this, his aggressiveness also increased. One evening, when they were watching a movie together, Michael dozed off. Danielle went upstairs to rest. And the next morning, when the woman was brushing her teeth in the bathroom, he burst in and hit her on the head. Michael justified his action by saying that she hadn't woken him up the night before. In response, Danielle stated that she was tired of all this and was leaving. These words only further enraged Michael, and he pounced on her, trying to strangle her. Poor Danielle couldn't even defend herself. She felt herself gradually losing consciousness. At one point, it seemed to her that this was the end. Some time passed, and Mrs. Redlick finally opened her eyes. Her husband was standing over her, frightened, confused, begging for forgiveness. Danielle didn't have the strength for conversation, so she just silently crawled away. After this incident, the couple continued to live under the same roof and raise their children together. But their relationship underwent drastic changes. It seemed they had reached a point of no return. Michael began to drink even more often, and quarrels in the house flared up at every turn, even over trifling reasons. The instances of the man's irritation turning into physical violence became more frequent. But no matter what, Danielle didn't leave him. As much as she was dissatisfied with the situation and resented Michael, her love for him didn't fade. All these upheavals couldn't help but affect Danielle herself. She became nervous, irritable, and withdrew into herself. To somehow abstract herself, the woman immersed herself in photography. And although most of the couple's conflicts didn't go beyond the house, their family still maintained a respectable appearance. Closer to the end of 2014, the Redlicks finally settled in Florida. This time, Michael, tired of constant stress, decided to radically change his career. He got a job as the Director of External Relations and Partnership Programs at the University of Central Florida and began teaching. Although they paid less there than in the NBA, the work brought satisfaction and stability. Initially, the family rented a place to live, but a year later, they purchased their own house in the picturesque Winter Park area. Their new family nest was impressive in its scale, a spacious Mediterranean-style home where Danielle claimed the attic floor. It became a kind of refuge for her, where she often spent nights, especially when Michael was seized by fits of rage. Testosterone injections not only rejuvenated her husband, but also revived the couple's intimate life. But even during intimacy, he could behave roughly. Their relationship remained tense and unstable. Against the backdrop of all these experiences, Danielle found solace in alcohol and gradually became addicted to it. Michael continued to work, providing for the family, while Danielle took care of the children and the household, increasingly closing herself off. Numerous quarrels and feuds eventually led to the couple divorcing in 2016. However, despite everything, the father never stopped seeing his children, financially supporting them and paying the bills. By that time, Danielle had already gotten a job at a school. New acquaintances helped her get out of her depression, and her work duties restored her sense of self-worth. However, she was still continuing to see Michael. He could come and go as he pleased. During one of these visits, an argument flared up again, after which Danielle ended up in the hospital with a head injury. As before, the woman kept silent about the true circumstances of the incident, fearing she might harm her husband. But this time, Michael took her silence for granted. Later, during the interrogation, Danielle said that something unexpected happened in early October 2016. Her husband tried to run her over with a car. Only by jumping into the bushes did the woman save her life. After this incident, she even went to the police station. But when the detectives began to pry into the details, Danielle simply turned around and left. The reason was the same as always. Eventually, the couple managed to reconcile, and they lived together again under the same roof. As it turned out, this decision proved fatal for them. Around 9 a.m. on January 12, 2019, a call came in to 911. At the other end of the line, a woman introduced herself as Danielle Redley and reported that her husband Michael had just died of a heart attack. When the paramedics arrived on the scene, even before crossing the threshold of the house, they smelled a strong odor of cleaning products, and in the hallway, they came across a bucket of water-colored pink. Further on, a scene worthy of a thriller unfolded before them. In the middle of the living room, in a pool of blood, lay a lifeless body. It became clear that the man had not died of a heart attack, as his wife had claimed, but from a stab wound. The woman who made the call was found with cuts on her wrists. Paramedics provided her with first aid before taking her to the hospital, and the police, meanwhile, began investigating this case. After examining the crime scene, law enforcement had no doubt that Michael Redley's life had been violently ended. It was unlikely that he had inflicted such a fatal wound on himself. Later, forensic experts confirmed that the blood in the house belonged to the deceased, and the pink liquid in the bucket turned out to be the same blood, only diluted. Apparently, someone, possibly the mistress of the house herself, had tried to destroy the bloody trail that led from the bedroom to the living room, pretending that the body had been dragged. But despite all efforts to clean up, the evidence could not be completely destroyed. There were splatters of blood in the corners of the room and on the walls, and at the entrance to the kitchen lay a large knife, while 3 smaller ones were found in the sink. The detectives were eager to question Danielle, so as soon as the medics certified that her injuries were not life-threatening, the woman was taken in for questioning. During questioning, she repeatedly changed her testimony. At first, she claimed that she thought her husband had died of heart disease. Later, she stated that he had taken his own life after an argument. However, experts refuted her claims. Such a wound is difficult to self-inflict, and people who intend to end their lives usually choose an easier and less painful method. The autopsy showed that Michael died from blood loss. With timely medical attention, his life could have been saved. In addition, his left eye was slashed. Toxicology tests also revealed a high level of alcohol in his system. The investigation showed that a few days before the incident, there had been an argument between the couple, witnessed by their older daughter. Michael had been drinking and barged into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding. However, their daughter Jadden intervened, taking the bottle away from him. After that, Danielle left the house and returned when her husband fell asleep. According to the girl, this was the first time she had seen such an outburst of anger from her father, for which he later apologized repeatedly. She still maintained that he was a loving and caring father, while at the same time insisting that her mother was the instigator of conflicts. The next day, the couple reconciled. Michael invited his wife and children to a football game. However, according to witnesses, Danielle looked upset and hardly spoke. That evening, the parents dropped the kids off at friends for a sleepover and were left alone. Later, Danielle went to McDonald's and returned home around 10:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, she found her husband drunk. During dinner, Danielle received a message from an unknown man. Michael saw this, bit off a piece of his hamburger and spat it at his wife. He then attacked her, trying to strangle her. In self-defense, Danielle grabbed the first thing she could, a knife, and plunged it into his chest. He fell and began bleeding profusely. According to the defendant, she immediately called for emergency help, but mistakenly dialed the wrong number. Her actions were later confirmed during the investigation. In a state of shock, she lay down next to Michael and fell asleep until morning. At least, that's how Danielle explained the 11 hours of inaction. When asked by the prosecution why she had lied during the emergency call and subsequent interrogations, Mrs. Redley explained that she was afraid. She worried that no one would believe she had acted in self-defense. There were reasons for this fear. Shortly before the incident, she had gotten into an altercation with friends. When the police arrived on the scene, she resisted, attempting to bite one of them. She also refused to cooperate with the investigation, leading to charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Danielle was on probation for about a year. It was also established that the cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted. She claimed she had attempted suicide due to emotional trauma, but the nature of the injuries suggested otherwise. They were superficial and not life-threatening. Therefore, her claims were not believed. Investigators also found that Danielle was far from a model citizen. Upon learning of Michael's infidelity, she registered on a dating site, where she communicated with men and sought revenge through infidelity. Her profile stated that she was single and not in a relationship. Analysis of countless messages between Michael and Danielle showed that she still loved her husband. When she learned of his infidelities, she felt betrayed and disappointed. She also discovered that Michael planned to leave her, despite appearing remorseful and wanting to restore their relationship. Danielle explained that it was difficult for her to understand and accept her husband's actions. She was heartbroken that she had devoted the best years of her life to someone who did not value her. The prosecution used this information against her. The prosecutor argued that the crime was intentional in a fit of rage, as she could not forgive his infidelity and the impending divorce. Like Mr. Redley, she was also prone to outbursts of anger, as confirmed by their neighbors, who noted that the couple often loudly argued, escalating into physical altercations. However, Michael and Danielle were described differently by those who knew them. Michael was portrayed positively as kind and caring, while Danielle was considered quarrelsome. Video evidence was presented showing the defendant behaving irrationally and attacking her husband. Michael's friends and brother agreed with this. One of them recalled calling her crazy, but reassured him that everything would be fine as long as the steak knives were hidden away. Danielle's attorney argued that her actions were dictated by self-defense and a history of emotional and physical abuse. Relatives, often witnesses to their fights, confirmed that Michael was abusive and emotionally cruel. They also knew that he frequently physically abused and belittled her, though he never did so in their presence. Some family members reported that Danielle was nervous and hot-tempered, but this only manifested after many years of marriage. The prosecution clung to the fact that she essentially left her husband to die, suggesting she was lying in wait. They argued that on the night of the incident she logged into her dating site account, indicating intent driven by hatred, resentment, and possibly even financial gain. After the divorce, Danielle stood to lose a portion of their accumulated wealth. At the time of Michael's death, her assets were valued at $1.2 million. It was also mentioned that she repeatedly changed her testimony, allegedly attempting to confuse the investigation and may have fabricated evidence. However, the defense insisted that Mr. Redley was a manipulator and predator. After the death of his first wife, he relentlessly pursued his stepdaughter and molded the young woman into what he wanted. During the investigation, the prosecution offered the defendant a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter that would have resulted in only 10 years in prison. However, she refused, despite facing the possibility of life in prison if convicted of first or second-degree murder. She continued to insist on her innocence. The outcome of the trial was unexpected for everyone. On July 17, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. They found Danielle Redley not guilty of intentional murder, believing her actions were indeed self-defense. However, they found her guilty of tampering with evidence, for which she received a 5-year suspended sentence. Since she had already served 3 years, they were credited to her. On August 5, 2022, the day the sentence was announced, the defendant was released in the courtroom. What do you think? Was the sentence fair? Or were the jurors skillfully misled into believing that Danielle taking Michael's life was calculated and cold-blooded? Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel. There are many more shocking stories ahead.